Froskurinn, Chinese LPL expert, here as only a visitor. What's your impression so far of the event?
I think certain things went as expected. I mean, obviously we're having a Chinese-Korean final. I think the thing that was probably the most shocking, because everyone's talking about the upset, obviously TSM's performance was less than stellar, probably less than anyone ever expected. And I know going into this I said it's much more likely that TSM will win or place highly. I still consider it an upset than they would to get crushed or to get stomped, which obviously they had a pretty unfortunate showing at the event. But I mean, otherwise it's pretty classic, pretty, if you follow like history of League of Legends, this is what everyone expected.
Yeah. You mentioned something a bit interesting that where you just expected and assumed that Chinese-Korean final, but it feels like, even though it's happened now for almost 3 years in Worlds, it seems like every time we come around to World times, people are always doubting that like there will actually be a Chinese-Korean final. So like, how do you even feel towards that kind of thinking? You know, do you think it's just that less people watch the LPL?
Well, a big thing is obviously is that the LCS are the Riot owned, and so just the exposure, and it's not like a slight against Riot or anything like that. They have more access to those players, to those storylines, and so just the general availability of that information to the Western audience is just so much easier. So obviously, especially in an English-speaking world, it's going to be, you know, what are the mysterious Chinese, what are they doing over there? And, you know, Korea, they've lost all this talent, it's been expedited, so they're looking weaker. And I do actually think that this is the weakest that Korea has ever looked. I mean, we saw the God bleed yesterday from Europe. So I think it's just availability of information. Time zones does play a huge factor of it. I mean, not everyone who's like hardcore into esports has the time to dedicate to stay up to like 4 o'clock in the morning watching a region that isn't their home region.
Yeah. So then I guess that just begs the question of like, since you've now established yourself as almost the premier Chinese expert in the West, what actually got you into watching it when obviously no one else did?
Obviously it was my circle of friends, and I mean the LPL broadcast right now that Riot has, they do a great job with the casters they have. They've got Tiberi Spawn, Pastry Time, Papa Smithy, Right Atlas, and I consider all of them like good friends of mine, great guys. They know what they're talking about, so I don't want people, I feel like there's almost like this pit of war of like me and like Kelsey versus them, and no, we're all friends, we're all saying the same thing. I mean, obviously there's different perspectives, but they're a really great group of guys. As far as how I got involved with the Chinese scene, it was actually through Kelsey. We've known each other for a very long time. Our circle of friends really were just, it was weird because they were all just into Chinese League of Legends, Drexen, people like that. And so when they needed a caster, I was casting for the ESL at the time, like Go for a little smaller, but it's the North American branch, not the European branch. And they're like, hey, do you want to cast Chinese League of Legends? Like, I really don't know anything about it. You know, I was a big Moscow 5 fan back in the day, so I called them the gateway drug into the Chinese League of Legends because that crazy aggression. So I guess that's just, it was just my circle of friends were already into it, so it was kind of through association.
When you mentioned there with the just crazy style that Chinese teams tend to have, during last night's press conference, Faker and Marin, when asked the question of like how they look at China now after the Korean talent has come in there, they said that they've sort of leveled out the aggression, like, you know, that it's not, that they've added more of the Korean flair to it, and they said this is actually what makes them this is what makes them better teams and like a bigger threat. Do you like agree with that, or do you think that that China has overtaken the Koreans rather than the Koreans have overtaken China in terms of playstyle?
I think it's kind of almost a double-edged sword. Like, I understand what they're saying. As far as like for me, the Korean playstyle, how I would define it, because even within the Korean teams, there are like sub-metas. Like, not every team is playing the same. The classic examples like the KT Arrows, they were the really aggressive, you know, Chinese-esque Korean team, and then you have like Samsung Blue. I consider the Korean playstyle in general about abuse of information. The Korean teams, when they gather information either through their vision control or however they do it, they are the most efficient and the most punishing of any of the other regions. And I think specifically through warding, it was very obvious last year, 2014, EDG went into playoffs, and it was very obvious that they had watched the KT Arrows versus Blue game, because a lot of the warding placements were suddenly, that was a big problem for China. And even still continuing on to this, this current split, I mean, OMG has very weak vision control. But EDG, you start to see this evolution. So I definitely think that there were trends, especially as we had Korean coaches coming over, Korean players. I know that the Chinese coaches and players have said, you know, it's not just the talent that we would like, because obviously they have top tier Korean talent, but it's the mentality of the Korean players, like placing them in the team environment and trying to create a cultural understanding and hierarchy within how the teams are performing. But as far as, you know, China being leveled off because of their Korean talent, it helps. and it's amazing to think that these teams are communicating. Like EDG is using English to communicate. So, I mean, and for how. Let's just think about this, like Mako and Deft right now, the bot lane, they're playing Kalista and Thresh, and normally throughout the LPL season, Deft wasn't a huge Kalista player. He talked about how it took him a bit of a ramp to learn. He had to like ramp up to it, but just how intricate that combo is and how high the skill ceiling is. And in their Fnatic game, when Deft and Mako outplayed Fabibin and the top red side, it was just like, that was incredible play. And these guys, they're not speaking the same language, so how is that happening? So just to say that, you know, they're just elevated because the Koreans, yes, there are Korean influences, but EDG were diving, you know, Nexus towers at like 20 minutes in the game, so they're still very back to their Chinese aggressive roots. And people think, this is the other thing, like people say that Fnatic's like the Chinese S team, and yeah, Fnatic likes to fight a lot, they like to run AoE compositions, but when Chinese teams fight versus when, you know, just Fnatic fights are very different times. And I think this is kind of the fine-tuned difference. And we saw this when, you know, EDG blew both Fnatic and AHQ out of the water. And those were the other, like, really heavy-set team-fighting teams. And there's a reason that happened.
So then, with all this said, then, with the Korean talent and everything, you, and them perhaps leveling up China and adding their own flair, you still, like, made a tweet recently where you said that the best EDG lineup ever was Chinese. I mean, how does that, you know, what do you think made that lineup better than perhaps the one that they have now? Or do you think it's more like the mentality of it, but the players, you know, the players could be Chinese, but if they had the mentality that they have now, do you think that like lineup would still be better?
Well, the tweet that I made is I was talking about OMG's lineup and how I think that they already have it was a joke about leveling. He's got so many name changes. But as far as EDG's past, like Chinese lineup versus their new lineup, I do think that their current iteration of EDG is far stronger than the last iteration. That said, when you look about what really changed as far as playstyle, Nami and Deft, the big thing between those two is that they were pretty much interchangeable. I think the two, probably three different facets that changed, because yes, Deft, I believe, is better than Name right now. He's performing exceptionally in his lane phase. His team fight has always been something that he's really well known for. Mako versus FCZF. Everyone's talking about Pawn, Deft, Clearlove, Koro, and obviously they're all playing phenomenally. I think that Deft and Clearlove's front line and Deft carrying is like the true core and backbone of EDG. But I talked about how Mako and Deft's Kalista Thresh plays, because that was something that we hadn't really seen in the LPL. Mako is so good right now, and he's just an immediate upgrade over FCZF. FCZF was passive in lane, he didn't have the best vision control, but his initiation sense was always far superior for EDG, especially because they were, you know, the baby blue, very Samsung-esque, in that they were a big 5v5 late game team fighting team, so they really relied on him. But to see Mako as a rookie kind of come into this position, I think he looks really good. I think between him, Wolf, and Lustboy are like the top three supports at this tournament. And Wolf, I mean, I don't have as much exposure to him as Mako, but Mako's having a great tournament.
You mentioned though that this was Mako's essentially like rookie season, where he just like came up this year. Last year, I think that most of Starhorn, aside from like Uzi and Insec, were also rookies in a sense. That so it's just, and you can just see that in the LSPL, like the Chinese version of Challenger, you see all these tons and tons of players just like come on through and advance onto the LPL as well, or just like, you know, really just shine. So do you think that China will overtake, even like just with the Chinese players, that they may be able to overtake Korea just because of like the sheer amount of players they actually have?
First and foremost, I just want to like clarify, because the LSPL guys look nuts over this. It's to call it the challenger scene, because obviously that's a word that comes with the context of the Western scene, and LSPL is very, very different. It's much closer, and I'm not trying to make a slight at North America, like don't take it that way, but it's much closer in structure to the LCS than it is to the challenger scene. I mean, these guys have their housing provided by Tencent, so all of the teams own apartments, so they'll like get a building and every single team will be in an apartment. It's all paid for by Tencent. To break any of their contracts, I mean, you're talking about like $125,000 to pay for these, effectively what the Western views as challenger players. So yes, I do think that the infrastructure in China is very, very curious, especially because of the clubs. They just have it's almost like talent farms, a very large pool to choose from. As far as if it's going to overcome Korea, I mean, I definitely think that this is EDG's best shot. But there's still that, I mean, the fact that this is EDG's best shot, and I think that this is the weakest that Korea's ever been, I'm still like, it's not 100%, is concerning, because Korea has historically shown that even with their talent, believing that they're the best region at executing and consolidating the talent that they have. And you take that and you reflect it against like Europe. Like Europe's big issue is that they have a ton of talent, but for whatever reason they can't consolidate it and execute it on the same roster. I mean, you think about Alliance, how that was supposed to be the super team, and yeah, it had its great split, but then, you know, Elements comes around, they suddenly start dropping off. So you're dealing with like cultural, language barriers, things like that. So I think Korea does have well suited just culturally, but also because the country is, I mean, obviously in Europe you're dealing with multiple countries, multiple different languages and cultural different values, so it's easier there, but I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, China, we look good. I think today, depending what the results are, as long as it's close, it'll answer questions, but I've always said from the beginning, Korea is the best at executing the talent that they have left, and obviously grooming and breeding new talent. I think I did the stats on this one day that 3% of the Korean population is ranked, which I think when you break it down, and it's like by population, because obviously if you go to China, it's got a larger population, so more people would be ranked, but it's like 1%. So.
Thank you so much for all your answers and for doing this interview. Do you have any final shout-outs, anywhere people can reach out to you, any plugs?
You can follow me at Twitter at LOL Froskurinn. I'd spell that, but I don't even think I can spell half the time. And also I would like to give a shout out to Team Dignitas and all of their sponsors, because obviously I work with Team Dignitas's Challenger European team, so hopefully we'll make the EU CS Coke Series. It'll be good.
Thanks a lot.
No, thank you so much.